The first ray of sunlight cuts through the darkness of the dungeon, and your pulse pounds in your temples like a war drum. You wake up in a tiny windowless cell where the smell of sweat, fear, and olive oil hangs in the air like a thick veil. Cold stone presses against your bare skin, and distant voices drift from the main building, loud laughter that makes your stomach twist in terror. Your body is filled with pain, bruises cover your sides, purple and yellow spots have blossomed like ugly flowers. An iron shackle on your ankle has rubbed the skin raw, and when you move, dry scabs fall to the floor. The clatter of heavy sandals on the marble warns you that a guard is approaching. In ancient Greece, such men were not just lazy watchmen. They broke the ribs and souls of prisoners. You quietly grab a thin tunic from the corner of the cell. You are 15 years old, although your days are feverishly measured not by birthdays, but by years without the right to freedom. In slavery, time drags on more slowly, each hour like a sword from a potter's wheel, a shard of reality that wounds you again and again. The door creaked as the guard threw it open. Sunlight flooded the dungeon, blinding you. You raised your hand, squinting. His face was scarred, each furrow a reminder of a man once broken, driven to extremes. "Wash yourself," he croaked, throwing a wet rag at your feet. "The master has important guests coming this evening." His gaze slid over your emaciated body with the same cold calculation as a groom assessing the quality of a racehorse. Your throat tightens. You know what important guests means. You understood it on the first night, when the other boys were taken away from your village in the morning fog. The boys from your neighborhood never returned, and your family was assured that the debts had been paid in the best currency: your flesh and sweat. Such was the harsh reality of ancient Greece, which no one ever read about in school textbooks. Behind the snow-white columns and loud symposiums lay a system that devoured young people and broke their will. The selection began long before you crossed the threshold of your master's house. Perhaps your parents owed money to a landowner in Attica, or perhaps marauders raided your village during one of the endless Peloponnesian conflicts. Perhaps you were so handsome that it became your sentence. In the rural hinterland, families survived on the brink: crop failure, an accident involving the father, illness, and the cruel hand of fate brought them face to face with creditors who would not accept empty promises. They needed immediate payment. In the present, not in the future. If you enjoy these quiet stories about history, please subscribe to the channel. It's free and helps me keep going. Imagine a tiny village among olive groves. Acrid smoke rises from the clay huts. Children run barefoot across the clay floor, their laughter mingling with the bleating of goats and the creaking of millstones. Life is harsh, but it is life. Then a drought strikes. Weeks without a drop of rain, the dying olive trees shed their tiny fruits. The barley stands dry and brittle, and the wells that have fed the village for generations dry up. Families are forced to part with their goats, then with precious jewelry that has been passed down from generation to generation. When their last resources are exhausted, the parents' gaze changes. They begin to see their children as commodities. Slave traders appeared in the village like vultures over a corpse, with chains and ropes like metal snakes. Their books recorded names and prices, and they offered a bargain: years of service for a handful of silver drachmas that would feed a family through the winter. At such a moment, any offer seemed generous. But you were a 12-year-old child and did not know what desperation meant. You saw your father lower his gaze as he set the price, and your mother turn away when the merchant felt your flesh, comparing you to a thoroughbred stallion. Promising good constitution, suitable for domestic work. Words whose weight at that moment was equal to the chains that clanked on your ankle. Silver drachmas glisten in the sun, but each one is a sentence on your fate. The merchant slowly pours the cold coins into your father's palm. The metal glints in the sunlight, and every gram of silver promises a year of your life. Your father takes the payment with a trembling hand, and your mother covers her face and weeps silently, unable to stop the deal. "It won't be long," they whisper to you. "You'll earn your money, come home a man, buy yourself some land, maybe find a wife." These words are sweet as honey, but they hide a deadly poison. In ancient Athens, every third inhabitant was a slave, and the hopes of captives rarely came true. A narrow path through olive groves leads you to the coast of the Aegean Sea. Here, where the waves whisper of freedom, all you can hear is the creaking of chains. Several dozen boys and young men are bound together with iron collars, heavy with sweat and rust. The older ones are silent. They have already realized that hope means only new disappointment. The younger ones cry out for their mothers until only muffled sobs remain, or until the guards beat the sound out of them with whips. Day after day, you rush past wonderful landscapes, endless hills with silvery olive trees, winding coastal roads where the water glitters like scattered diamonds, mountain passes with eagles circling overhead. But you can't see any of this. The whole world has shrunk to the length of the chain between you and the person in front of you. Step by step along the stone pavement, you realize more and more clearly that you will not be returning home. At night, you are chained to stakes in the ground. You lie down on your side in the dust, feeling the cold iron hoop tighten around your neck. Your iron sentence. In the distance, you can hear the muffled sobs of other boys. Sometimes the merchants bring in guests, men in expensive tunics, and with the refined scent of perfume, who walk among you like shepherds, carefully examining their cattle. They feel your bodies, listen to your breathing, check your teeth and the strength of your grip, assessing how much labor or entertainment can be extracted from each of you. Professional landowners choose the strong and resilient. They will be sent to plow the fields from dawn to dusk. Householders look for the docile and quick-witted, capable of serving in wealthy homes in the agora. But there is a third, most terrifying category of buyers. They prefer delicate, slender bodies for their own whims. Their morals have long since decayed, and they seek youth and beauty, sparing neither soul nor body. When you finally reach the Athenian slave market in the port of Piraeus, all your senses are heightened. First, you hear the hum of hundreds of voices, merchants haggling, slaves cursing their fate, overseers shouting for silence. Then there is a tickling smell, sweat, unwashed bodies, ancient stone, and a bundle of straw lying on the ground. And then you see rows of naked people like goods on a counter, children, barely able to stand next to their mothers, their eyes full of fear. Elderly people with bent backs and faded faces helplessly exchange their last ounce of strength for a pitiful piece of silver. You are cleaned of dust and rubbed with olive oil so that your skin shines in the sun, not out of pity, but for profit. Clean slaves sell for more. The oil highlights every muscle you have honed while dragging chains behind you. You are put on display alongside domestic servants. A wealthy master has decided that you are too handsome for field work. The auctioneer's voice carries across the square. He lists your age, region of origin, physical condition, mentioning your pleasant appearance and gentle nature. Secret codes for perverted buyers. The bidding starts and immediately takes off. There are more and more interested buyers. You stand motionless, feeling strangers' hands closing around you, testing the strength of their grip, looking into your mouth, stroking your hair. You are no longer a person, but a commodity on display. The winner of the auction emerges from the crowd with a sly smile. His name is Lysander. You will learn his name later, but now you see only an expensive silk tunic, the deep purple color of the fabric, and soft hands that have never known labor. He counts the silver drachmas, and you feel each one like a shackle, forever binding you to your new master. His gaze is like an icy pattern on glass. It instantly suffocates any desire to breathe. Lysander owns a huge house in the most prestigious district of Athens, and your village next to it is like a tiny speck of dust. White marble columns tower above you. The walls are painted with scenes of legendary gods and heroes, and the floors are decorated with mosaics depicting Athena fighting a giant. Servants carry trays of food and wine, their steps quick, as if they fear every sound. You notice that most of them are young men of various appearances, but their eyes all show the same lost hope. This is the face of slavery. The man leading you to your new masters is called Demetrius. He himself was once a slave, bought as a boy, and only escaped to freedom thanks to his wits and cruelty. Now he rules Lysander's entire court with an iron fist. Demetrius is skilled at breaking people's will. He knows how to break their spirit and make them obey without question. He explains the rules as he leads you through the marble halls and gloomy cellars. You will eat twice a day, barley porridge in the morning and bread and olives in the evening. You will be given clean clothes only once a week. You will bathe when ordered, eat when ordered, sleep when ordered, speak only when asked. Never dare to meet the gaze of a free man, and don't you dare refuse any order. And then comes the moment when the blood runs cold in your veins. Your only purpose is to serve your master and his guests in whatever way they see fit. Pour wine, serve food, clean rooms, or become entertainment. Demetrius promises with a cruel smile that time will reveal this talent to you. Some slaves try to resist, but resistance only brings pain. Submission, on the other hand, promises privileges, slightly better bread, a warmer place to sleep, maybe even a tiny personal item. Your cell is at the very bottom, in the basement. Small rooms with straw mattresses, thin blankets, and a chamber pot for nighttime needs. The walls are lined with thick stone to muffle the moans that periodically drift in from neighboring cells. You quickly understand why this is necessary. The first to come to you is Mark, a guy your age who has been in captivity for 2 years. His eyes are so full of pain that you would believe he has lived 100 lives. Then Alexio speaks in a quiet whisper. His skin still bears fresh scars from Lysander's special guests. And finally, Philemon appears. He's only 14, but he looks older than a gray-haired old man. He was once the son of a small merchant, until creditors arrested his family and took away his children. 6 months ago, Philemon ended up here, and it is he who tells us what really happens at the symposiums. The symposium in Athens was considered the center of cultural life. Men in togas gathered around low tables, drank wine from painted ceramic bowls, and discussed democracy, the teachings of Socrates, the latest tragedies of Aeschylus, and the latest military campaigns. At best, these were courtly conversations that would be remembered for centuries. In reality, when the wine flowed freely and the pottery became stained, the tone of the discussions changed. Philosophers who had spent the day discussing justice and virtue turned into cruel masters at night, demanding entertainment from their young slaves. Before the festivities begin, the slaves are washed and anointed with olive oil so that their skin glistens as if bathed in sunlight. They are dressed in the finest tunics, barely covering their young bodies, and sometimes adorned with gold bracelets and necklaces, so that they become not a labor force, but decorations for the room. Sometimes the young men are forced to dance to the sound of flutes. Others are ordered to play clay xylophones, and still others are made to entertain the guests with bunches of juicy grapes. The symposium begins solemnly. Guests recline on soft cushions, discussing democracy and poetry while drinking wine and enjoying exquisite dishes such as roast pigeon and omelet sautéed in oil with aromatic herbs. But as the warm wine loosens the strings of reason, the conversation increasingly descends into crude humor and indecent jokes. The older men boast of their valor and power, and the young men in tunics are ordered to perform various pleasures. Some will feed grapes from the hands of a high-ranking guest, some will massage shoulders, and some will have to become living toys. And the first drop of fear falls into your heart. This hall, filled with wise men and aristocrats, is in fact a trap where humanity drowns in bowls of wine and the deadly touch of power. You enter the house, and the conversations suddenly fall silent. And you realize that here you are no longer a guest, but a commodity. It seems to start with a harmless request. A sympathetic old man who looks like your grandfather invites you to sit down next to him, share some wine, and tell him about your homeland. He asks where you come from, if you miss your family, if anyone has hurt you. While you are answering, his hand first rests lightly on your shoulder, then moves to your back, lower and lower. You try to pull away, but he squeezes you tighter. The influential people around you, merchants, officials, philosophers, watch indifferently, their conversations falling silent. You struggle desperately, but the laughter of the guests drowns out your cries. Your clothes are torn, and you feel your childhood crumble. The stone walls absorb your screams as you realize that you are nothing more than a slave in Lysander's house, and from now on, nothing belongs to you. After the first rape, you lie in your cell, staring at the cold ceiling. Your body aches, but the wounds to your soul are much deeper. In the eyes of your tormentors, you are no longer a human being, but entertainment, an exhibit in a gallery of vice. And this is only the beginning. In the months that follow, you learn that that night was just a prelude. Some guests come here for special delicacies. One loves to torment young slaves, another competes with his friends to see whose victim will scream the loudest. The palace overseer incites the guests and slaves, encouraging them to increase the severity of the punishments. A broken spirit is the cheapest commodity. The hierarchy of cruelty in the house is as intricate as a complex pattern. The newest slaves, the recruits, become the first supplies for the debauched. Those who survive longer may receive a promotion, personal cooks, cleaners, or chambermaids. They are less likely to come into contact with guests. But promotion is only granted after complete surrender. You must betray your honor and renounce your own identity. Some try to resist. Mark ran away in the first few weeks, but he was caught and tied up so badly that he limped all winter. Alexei refused to carry out a special order and spent 3 days in chains under the scorching sun without a drop of water. The others saw that any other form of protest was tantamount to death. The prisoners learned to survive in different ways. Some withdraw into themselves, like dead souls. Their bodies are there, but inside they are empty. Others, predators of the spirit, learn to guess their master's moods and avoid the most severe punishments by agreeing to anything. Others simply die, from wounds, disease, or despair. In such places, death is sometimes easier than life. Psychological shackles are sometimes stronger than chains. Isolation is one of the main tools of slave owners. You are torn away from your family and language, locked up among other unfortunate people, but without any chance of support. Unpredictability is another. You never know when you will be called and what fate awaits you. Constant anxiety is more exhausting than beatings, but the most sophisticated technique is the destruction of personality. Your name is taken away and replaced with a new one that sounds pleasant to Greek ears. You are forbidden to speak your native language, practice the customs of your ancestors, or worship your gods. By dressing you in foreign clothes, feeding you foreign food, and forcing you to honor foreign gods, they slowly erase everything that was once you. The guests whose names adorn the porticos of Athens, the generous benefactors and thinkers, appear here without masks. Their aristocratic ranks and loud speeches about virtue dissolve into a thirst for power over the bodies and souls of others. Among them is even the prominent politician Dionysius, famous for his speeches on justice, who turns into a ruthless rapist whose actions cast a shadow over his entire career. In this house, cruelty is the main entertainment for those who rule Athens behind the scenes of power. And you know that as long as there is a demand for slave fear, there will always be a fresh victim here. Have you ever wondered how it is possible to read Homer and at the same time display such monstrous cruelty? In public, they exhorted citizens about the sanctity of the law and the moral foundations of the city, while behind closed doors they ruthlessly trampled on human dignity. Remember the noble aristocrat who read lines about heroism at a symposium, while in his bedroom he ordered young slaves to dance naked, mocking their every breath. He quoted the Iliad as if the gods of the Greek pantheon justified his mockery. Then there is Cleomenes, a wealthy merchant known for his donations to the construction of temples in honor of Athena and for financing the aqueduct. His name was glorified for his care for the poor, but behind this mask of a philanthropist lurked a sadist who considered the beating and branding of slaves a necessary lesson about the natural order of things. In his view, pain tempered the spirit and taught slaves humility, just as young men were trained in the ephebia to prepare for military service. The most sinister was Sophist, one of those hidden teachers who preached ethics, moderation, and respect for the gods. He wrote treatises on virtue and discussed nobility at banquets. But as soon as he knocked back an extra cup of wine, the monster in him came out. He tormented slaves with clever arguments, proving that suffering was the highest form of wisdom. For these people, there was no contradiction. From their point of view, slaves lived in a different moral category. One set of virtues applied to citizens and a completely different set to property. One could be generous among equals and merciless to those who were considered property by law. The oligarchic system seems so orderly and harmonious. Some write philosophical dialogues, others sculpt magnificent sculptures, and temples and city walls are built for slave labor. Over time, slaves learn to survive in this hell. They recognize the slightest gesture of their master. A sudden pat on the back turns into a threat, and a warm glance is fleeting mercy. They develop the art of psychological evasion, alienate themselves from pain, and dissolve into their own thoughts. Under the mask of obedience, you avoid blows, but in return, you get emptiness inside. Every concession to tyranny shatters the soul. Step by step, self-confidence dries up like a fountain that the masters used to fill with water for public baths. The boy who once scattered the clouds over the olive grove with his laughter turns into a man with dead eyes, gliding through the shadows of his own fear. A special family emerges among the slaves. They communicate without words, passing warnings to each other with glances, sharing their last piece of bread, standing guard over tiny dragon-shaped lamps that their master allows them to light before dawn. When nightmares torment them in their sleep, they huddle together as if they are their only hope for salvation. But even these relationships are not untarnished. For the slightest favor, the master may grant a little leniency, and then immediately turn friends into traitors. The promise of a free hour or a piece of cheese makes slaves spy on each other and sometimes betray their plans to escape. At the same time, love and hate are intertwined in an inextricable knot of despair. At night, lying on a straw mattress, you try to remember your mother's face, but every day it fades, dissolving into the faces of your oppressors. You remember your father's voice, but now it is drowned out by the laughter of guests and the moans of your fellow prisoners. The past recedes like a mirror in the back chamber, and the present stretches endlessly, like a long march of slaves carrying stones to the city forts. The physical and emotional wounds do not heal. Some masters prefer subtle psychological torture. They humiliate mercilessly, leaving no bruises but cutting deep scars in the soul. Others use their fists, whips, and red-hot iron, leaving hideous marks on the bodies of their slaves. And sophisticated monsters combine physical pain with sexual degradation. Their cruel performances have long shocked even the most seasoned warriors. And the most frightening feature of all this cruelty is its ordinariness. A poetry lover may strike a slave girl in the middle of a recitation simply out of boredom. The poet-songwriter often demands new, humiliating performances from stunned young men, as if staging an endless show. Violence is as common here as lighting a fire in a home, and there is no passion or hatred in it, only the cold-bloodedness of everyday life. Slaves learn to feel their own bodies as something alien. They are like alien vessels for the soul, experiencing an inhuman burden. At such moments, consciousness retreats deep inside, leaving the self as an observer. This helps them survive, but it severs their connection with the person inside, turning slaves into ghosts, the same shadows their masters saw in their eyes. Have you ever noticed how silence can bind the soul more tightly than chains? In your second year of service in the house, you began to change, and not just outwardly. Your voice became even without the slightest trace of the mountain accent that once gave you away as a child of the Pyrenean passes. You speak cautiously, as if weighing each word. Here, in the boarding house of wealthy Romans, an angry glance from your master is worth more than your life. Your posture has also changed. You walk with your shoulders slumped and your eyes downcast, as if afraid of being noticed, for the gaze of a supervisor can turn any moment into torture. Even more disturbing are the changes in your thoughts. You involuntarily calculate the whims of free people, even though many of them have no power over you. Any unexpected sound, the click of shoes on the marble of the atrium or the clinking of glasses from the tablinum, makes you flinch. You thank heaven if you are given an extra piece of bread, if you are not called upon to fulfill your master's whim in the middle of the night, or if the latifundist shows simple, good-natured indifference instead of cruelty. This inner readiness to obey is the pinnacle of their educational system. They have made you a slave who is not only afraid of punishment, but also sincerely believes in his own helplessness. The demands of the overseers are kept to a minimum because you have already learned to punish yourself. However, even in this system of widespread violence, tiny sparks of resistance flare up. In their free moments, the slaves whisper to each other, remembering their homelands. Some from Gaul, some from Mauritania, some from the provinces of Asia Minor. They tell stories about wildflowers, about the wind that blows across the steppes, and about the festival of Dionysus, long forgotten here. Some secretly mold miniature statues of the goddess Cybele from the fragments of amphorae and hide them in cracks in the walls, hoping to one day bring them to light. Others sing quiet songs in their own languages. Neither the overseer nor the steward can understand the words. The most important thing is that they take it upon themselves to bear witness. They remember the names of those who fell under the whip or were sold when it became necessary to supplement the family budget. The names are whispered through the narrow corridors like a plea for justice, like a selfless promise that none of them will be erased from memory. This is also a struggle, tiny but significant. The very existence of songs, stories, and secret inscriptions is a challenge to the house, where luxurious mosaics in the atrium and frescoes depicting Victoria over the neighboring city were supposed to glorify the greatness of the owners. Between the rich panels and picturesque scenes lies the unconcealed pain of those who were turned into commodities. In the third year, something in you breaks completely. It happens at a lavish symposium celebrating the emperor's triumph over Umbria. Guests make noise late into the night. Wine cups clink against swords, and young aristocrats drunk with wine and power gather in the lavish hall of the tablinum. They invent a game. You must perform live entertainment. Whoever can elicit the most dramatic reaction from you wins. They order you to dance to ridiculous tunes, make funny faces, stand on one leg and tell stories about your childhood. Each subsequent order strikes deeper and deeper. You grow before their eyes not as a human being, but as an amusing animal in feathers and wreaths. And at that moment, the last thread that connected you to the shepherd boy on the green mountain meadows is severed. You cease to feel pain, bitterness, and humiliation. You become a soulless puppet. Your head is empty. You anticipate desires before they are spoken. You accept any form of mockery without a hint of resistance. Your leaders admire your transformation. You get a cleaner tunic, a hot meal every day, and a cell with a window overlooking a patch of orchard with laurel trees. Other slaves look at you with fear and envy. The name of your freedom is locked in this same cage of soulless submission. But even in this state of numbness, an observer slumbers within you. You are like a spectator sitting in the box, watching the endless play of arrogant masters. You memorize their laughter, their cruel jokes, so that one day you can tell the truth to the world beyond these wrought iron bars. At the hottest hour of the Roman slave market, he suddenly notices the trembling hands of a boy. And at that moment, something stirs in his long, cold soul. He has long since learned all the rules of this house, the alternating waves of cruelty and indulgence, the well-oiled mechanism of suffering without which the wealth of the patricians would not be possible. There is a constant need for a fresh supply of unfortunate souls here. Young slaves rarely survive more than 3 to 5 years. Some have their backs broken, some have their faces ravaged by disease, and when their time is up, they are sent to the Ludus Magnus Gladiator School near the Colosseum or to the salt and gold mines of Sicily. Several people disappear in a single night. No cries, no traces are found, but life in the city goes on. All this forces the master to regularly visit the slave market, which is spread out in the Forum Romanum and stretches to the port of Ostia, where ships with captives arrive from Gaul, Spain, and the East. Sometimes he accompanies Dominitius, a nobleman by birth, to serve as a living example of successful education. What a paradox! The same broken boy who once stood white with fear under the auctioneer's hammer now frowns at the crowds of new merchandise. He assesses the crooked backs, the convulsive glances, the scars on the hands, and gives nothing away about his former self. When Dominici asks, "How do you think they'll break him? Quickly, or will he put up a fight?" he replies coldly, based on bitter experience. The first one will be too rebellious. They won't break him right away. The second is already damaged, not worth the effort. The third is capable of serving long and without question. An old smile spreads across the master's face, and the young slaves look at him with pleading and hope, as if a spark of human life still burns in him. They do not know that surviving and truly living are two completely different things. In the midst of the hustle and bustle of the market, he notices a boy who reminds him with uncanny accuracy of himself in days gone by. dark curls, a frightened look, thin shoulders trained by hard labor in a village near Tuscany. He is barely 13, but his muscles betray a hardened, resilient young man. Something stirred inside him, a painful spark of memory of the years when he was still free. He staggered, and Dominici, dropping his cup of wine, grabbed him by the arm. "Are you all right?" asked the host, looking around at the guests in embarrassment. He lied that he was too bothered by the heat, but the truth was much more complicated. The boy's gaze awakened memories of his mother, of the frying pan banging on the throne and the aroma of stewed beans, of his father's ringing laughter, of the wild wind over the mountain meadows. These images were forbidden fruits that were difficult for a slave to swallow. Fate decreed that the boy was bought by another master for a good price. He did not have to suffer and watch as he was broken and made obedient again. But the image of the young boy's gaze haunted him at night. Nightmares brought back the smell of the fresh forest and the ringing water of his native stream. The echoes of these memories threatened to destroy the petrified shell that had made him the perfect slave. Soon it was the evening of another symposium, a quiet and scholarly gathering where the heavily oiled heads of philosophers and politicians adorned the stone benches under the porticos of the villa. They argued about the nature of virtue, quoted Plato and Seneca, and divided people into those who were naturally free and innate slaves with lower souls. One claimed that justice only comes to those who are born to rule, while the place of others is in chains and dungeons. Another argued that education and environment could elevate even a slave to nobility, if only he were given a chance. Their gray-haired heads quietly bowed in leather togas, jotting down quotes on wax tablets and adjusting their shaved chins. They drank cloudy mulch and conversed comfortably, unaware of how their own servants trembled at their every gesture. In this intellectual luxury, amid conversations about morality and the ideal state, he suddenly realized something important. There was no place here for innocence and ignorance. All these philosophical verses did not justify the atrocities, but made them even more cynical. Possessing sufficient intelligence, these people knew how deeply their actions contradicted any notion of justice, and chose evil consciously. This moment brought clarity. The system exists not because of ignorance, but because of the will of those who fully understand the gravity of their choice. Elegant marble columns, solemn cypress groves, and bursts of political ideas. Nothing can cancel out the boundless cruelty in the basements and dungeons. So the years go by, filled with insight and despair, and only the endless silence of the night preserves the echoes of that very humanity that was lost in the distant past. You are a ghost in the majestic halls of a Roman patrician house. No one notices your footsteps, but as soon as you are called, you materialize, ready and silent. Do you know that last summer, in this very house, young gladiators rehearsed their fights in the shadow of marble columns? You have honed the art of invisible service. You glide through the halls like a ghost and suddenly turn into flesh and blood when needed. Before your eyes, the faces of newly arrived slaves constantly change, young and full of hope, which is broken by endless beatings. The cycle of cruelty and exploitation repeats itself here from century to century. Yesterday, respectable senators rode in a carriage drawn by a pair of thoroughbred horses, and at dawn they camp.